Hey, hello, world history students. We are going to be talking about the Roman army. So have your outline ready. Let me get the camera lined up and we'll dive right in. 3 points and a so what conclusion. Let's talk about the importance of the Roman military. Okay, the first point is all about strengths. So what were the strengths of the Roman military? Again, probably one of the most famous military uniforms in all of world history. With the helmets and the feathered helmets and the red capes and the rectangular shields and all that. Um, and we even talked about the Romulus and Remus and kind of their sons of Mars and raised by a wolf and the kind of their warlike origins. But what was it about the actual Roman military that made it so successful? Because this isn't a misnomer. Their military is one of the most important aspects of them as a civilization. Well, the first is that it was professional. That it was not just a militia group. It was not just citizen soldiers, even though they were citizens, but it wasn't just volunteers coming together to defend the nation. No, they were professional and they trained and they had discipline and they were, unified and standardized. Standardized means that it wasn't like, hey, grab your, whatever weapon and sword and shield and armor, spear that you have at home and come bring that. They were like, no, we're going to be standardized. Everyone's going to have the same helmet. Everyone's going to have the same shield. Everyone's going to have the same boots. Everyone's going to have the same components that could be replaced from one soldier to another. And so it was a professional unit. It wasn't just again, kind of a militia where that would be more like citizens who have some sort of weapons of their own, and then they're called up in times of crisis to defend their hometown. It doesn't mean in the early parts of the Republic, that they were always soldiers all the time, but more and more throughout its history, the soldiers were more and more professional. And by the way, professional specifically means they were paid. So again, not volunteer, or at least not they weren't forced into it, but they were paid to do their service like a job, which usually increases the quality of those participating. Um, Also, another key strength, adaptation. One of the great things about the Roman military was that they were always looking to adopt new ideas. There was no sense of, well, this is how we've always fought. This is the weapon we've always fought. This is the armor we've always worn. This is how we've always been organized. We're going to stick with it. No, every time they encountered a new Latin tribe, every time they encountered a new border enemy, and they saw things that the enemy was doing that was more effective than what they did, they wanted to take that on and they wanted to improve it. They were really good at recognizing new ideas and being flexible or humble enough to include that strategy. And so Roman weaponry, although it kind of gets a basic look by the actual Roman Empire, there's lots of different versions of it as they sought this various forms of adaptation. They were always ready to meet new circumstances and challenges. Um, we got a picture of a typical Roman soldier. Some of the key things as they became known. They had oftentimes fought with the traditional square shield, the helmet. You can kind of look at that as yourselves. Their number one weapon was at first the javelin that they could throw from a distance, then switching to the sword and then the dagger if necessary. They were well armored, which gave them an advantage over various other forces. Um, and so again, even that would change over time, but there's at least kind of a typical Roman Republic soldier. Not just the infantry, but they also had more advanced weaponry. You have basically they call them missile launchers, but they launched high-speed, heavy-grade javelins or rocks. The thing in the middle is a siege tower for you would wheel that up to a fortress or a wall, usually around a city or a fort maybe, and allow soldiers to be protected as they stayed inside of it, and then made their way up to the wall and were able to breach the walls. You have a similar breaching mechanism there for a naval combat where you could take one ship and then have a spiked bridge that would go between the two ships so that you could send your infantry onto the other ship and conquer it, take it out of commission. And then you have a typical catapult there, kind of covered by my screen, but you had a catapult. So their adaptation and their professionalism and their tactics in warfare weren't just limited to the infantry, but it was quite advanced and always looking for new ideas. Another strength, organization. Like with being professional, is they were thought a lot through how they were organized and had discipline throughout their ranks, and they who was in charge and what was the tactical unit and how to move together and how would they support each other, how would they fight as an overall unit, how would they supply the overall unit, what would that be orchestrated by. Um, That was very specifically delineated in the Roman military. And so you had various groups. You had the Roman century, which was roughly about 100 soldiers, more like 80 soldiers with officers, broken down into cohorts, which then the cohort made up centuries, and the centuries made up cohorts. The cohorts made up then a legion. Legions were then supported by cavalry. And so, again, they had a very clear military structure that was in place and kind of could move the different pieces around and support one another. Another strength was simply rewards. I mentioned that they were a professional army in terms of the soldiers were, again, oftentimes fighting for home and hearth, but they were also fighting for rewards. Citizenship was one reward that you could be given for serving in the army. Obviously, pay, pension, which meant money even after you left the military, or even if you died, that your family would receive. You could receive land. And the other key aspect of having such great rewards was it meant that soldiers were not necessarily drafted into military service, but they were volunteers. And again, volunteers tend to fight much better than those who are forced to fight. Self-motivation is a key strength, and the rewards and the honors. There were also military parades. There were also political positions. There were various things that brought would motivate a Roman citizen or even a Roman emigre to become part and serve in the military. Okay, tactics. So tactics then, just in terms of when they fought together, when they took the field, what made them an elite fighting force? Well, as we've already kind of alluded to, organization. They fought as a unit. This isn't as large as a Greek phalanx, or as rigid. They have other tactical means, but again, they fought as a unit. The idea of the one superhero, the Samson going out there, or Russell Crowe, or whatever the hero of a movie might, and he's out there just slaying man after man after man. No, the Roman strength was that they fought together as a unit. But then you can see the famous tortoise, as they called it, being depicted here, recreated by guys, modern day. But they were also flexible in that they had, when we looked at the organization, where you had the legion and the cohorts and then the centuries, and then you'd even have like squads, where they could become small units, fighting units, so that it wasn't like the whole army was slow and cumbersome and took time to react to circumstances on the battlefield. They had lower small division command and flexibility so that they could adapt to the circumstances of the battlefield. And that's what that third point is, the idea of small or individual unit competence. Good officers, good leaders, so that it wasn't hundreds or thousands of people standing around waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. No, each small unit knew what to do, or had freedom and competence, and were well trained in order to respond to circumstances very quickly. And that made them much more effective tactically. Also was their infrastructure. One key thing that oftentimes gets overlooked in terms of how well a military force does is the infrastructure that supports it. Armies, has been said, they march on their stomachs. And so you could have a great army, you could have all these wonderful weaponry, but what happens when they need to be fed? Or what happens when you need to move the army? Or what happens when you need to resupply and get them or replace soldiers who have died or been wounded? You're going to need an infrastructure, and that includes roads, cities, and supply lines. And the Romans, you see here a depiction of the Roman roads throughout their eventual empire. We haven't gotten that big yet. They were expert infrastructure builders. It's kind of the unglamorous part of a civilization. We like to see the big temples and the columns, or the pyramids, or the Colosseum. But what really allows it to thrive are its freeways, its waterways, its aqueducts. It's how do you get things from the mines or the fields into the cities? It's the city walls. How do they make sure they have clean water? All of these different things. The Roman army was very organized in its infrastructure, so that its military could be deployed very quickly. It could be resupplied very quickly, and that a lot of times is the difference between victory and defeat. In World War II, the United States, I've heard people say, you can boil down American victory almost to the fact that we were really good at building Jeeps, and we had a lot of gasoline, because our army was able to move more quickly and flexibly than other armies. Yeah, that might be a little simplistic, but it emphasizes the importance of infrastructure. They were also very good at fortifications. Once they took a territory, they knew how to fight a defensive battle and keep and preserve it and maintain it. So very good fort builders, and also cavalry, the use of kind of the tanks of the ancient world, and that they emphasized cavalry. They learned early on the importance of mounted horsemen or soldiers, and they put it to good use over the centuries of their existence. Okay, many Roman roads so well built that they still exist today. The one on the left, you can actually see a kind of a little drainage ditch in the middle to make sure it didn't flood during rainy season or in the winter. You see drainage ditches off to the side. Again, they're not that they're not that they're main highways anymore, but you can still a lot of modern highways, or you can follow the same routes that Roman roads took, and you can still find them. You know, they're so well built, they're around millennia later. Okay, so those are their strategic or tactical advantages. And finally, just want to talk about the impact of the Roman army. I'm going to move my picture here to see the map a little better. But the idea is that the Roman army, when we talk about the growth of Rome from just a couple small towns on the Tiber River and the Seven Hills of Rome, how did it expand into all of Italy, and then how into an entire almost continental empire? The army really played that role. Because again, as I said the other day in class, Romans were really a lot of different tribes in Italy. There wasn't like, oh, we're the Roman ethnicity. No, there were various Italian tribes, and you can look at the map and see all the different names. I won't take time to state them all, but you had one of the major ones were the Etruscans in the north, who for a lot of the history were the dominant force on the peninsula. Then you had the Latins, who were the central. That's where the kind of Rome proper is going to emerge from. The south of Italy was a bunch of Greek colonies. Even the Athenians had a colony on Syracuse, and that Magna Graecae or Graecia represents kind of the frontier of Greek Empire. So it was very, very diverse, and there were all these different cities and ethnicities and mixing peoples. How did the Romans become kind of come to conquer the entire peninsula? Well, it comes from the success of their military. The first forces that were just meant to defend the most basic settlements, they had to defend themselves. And there was a lot of warfare on the Italian peninsula, and there was a lot of need to protect oneself. And so, again, the Romans, at the expense of maybe developing a lot of other cultural feats, they spent a lot of time developing their military. And the more they defended themselves well. And that success caused an expansion. When someone attacked and they won, well, then it meant they actually gained territory of those attacking nations. And so as they even defended themselves, they took on more and more land. And as more and more nations saw them as a successful, powerful nation and maybe asked for their help or thought, hey, you guys are pretty good at this. We have these other enemies. Can we join you? More and more of those Italian tribes were brought under the label of Rome, or brought under the label of becoming Roman, even though, again, they at one time they were very diverse. Others, at other points, as they began to grow, they began to increase their trade. And so a lot of times battles would have to be fought to protect your trade routes, or maybe you'd make an ally and then your ally would need your help. And so you'd have to go and defend them. And so, and you would also bring people into your fold because of that idea of inclusion. That again, to be Roman meant you got this thing called citizenship, and that meant you were protected. You were allowed your own local government. You were allowed your own local worship, and there was a certain stability because of the strength of the Roman army that you got when you said, "Hey, I'm Roman." And so, just almost not, I won't say prestige, but the security and the kind of the benefits of becoming Roman. While not everybody was like, "Oh, some were conquered and they were forced to," but in the initial stages, not as much. A lot of time, it was defensive. It was just success brought them more and more territory, more and more inclusion, and more people who wanted to become part of that empire. Or even once they were conquered, found it actually to be a long-term benefit, and thus never rebelled, but eventually were assimilated into becoming Roman. The price you would pay there is, of course, you would pay tribute, you would pay taxes to Rome, and you would contribute soldiers to the armed forces. And so by about 264 BC, you can see that for the first 400 years of Rome's existence, it goes from being just a small city and a couple of isolated tribes to being in control of the entire Italian peninsula. More and more of a major power. And again, that's the military and its successes largely led to that. And then that success is going to bring it into conflict with a real and much older kind of Mediterranean, I won't say world power, but a large empire, and that is what's known as the Carthaginian Empire. And you can see here, based on the map, the purple being Carthage and Rome being the red. Once the peninsula was solidified under Roman control, all of a sudden the next frontier, the next horizon, or the next neighbors, the next border conflicts. We're going to bring it into conflict with not just the latest small Italian tribe, but a major power. And the conflict between Rome and Carthage is going to completely reshape Rome's future and the nature of the Roman Republic. And so that'll be the topic of our next lecture. But again, we can see the military is playing a chief role in this transition from small republic to continental republic and then eventual empire. So big ideas. The success was built upon discipline, rewards, and organization. As we stated, even today, and modern armies and armies ever since continue to build upon or build successful military forces based upon the precedents established by the Romans. They were very successful. It was a successful army that united Italy and then eventually would expand it to become a world empire. In what was almost, I would, argue, an unconscious effort. It was not, we want more land, we want more land, we want more land. It was simply, we are in conflict, we won that conflict, and now look at that, we get more territory, or more people want to join us, and we're growing and growing based on just because of our own success. And that success would eventually bring it into a widening ring of conflict, not just of small local tribes and border disputes, but into an actual clash of civilizations. And that's first going to be seen in the conflict with Carthage that we'll be discussing in our next lecture. All right, appreciate your attention, and we'll be talking and discussing this tomorrow in class. So I'm looking forward to it. Talk to you soon.